Let's talk Pakistani dramas. And this week, we have to talk about Man Neel O Neel. Back in 2009, audiences around Pakistan found themselves pulled into the love story of Hassan and Banu, their family, their hopes, their dreams, their differences. Halfway through the show, that same audience had the rug pulled out beneath their feet when Hassan and Banu's families were struck with tragedy and reality. The show was Dastan, and Dastan was the last time I cried profusely for fictional characters and went into mourning for weeks. Until today. Man Neel O Neel introduced audiences to Rabi and Sonu, two young, naive individuals with the drive to create a name for themselves. Through Rabi and Sonu's young romance, we are introduced to many different stories. Stories which are deemed taboo, stories which aren't talked about but happen all the time. After Manjogi and Nadan, I recorded a video stating I almost hoped for a tragic end in Sultana Siddiqui's third installment of her mob trilogy. Because in reality, can anyone escape a mob? The outcome is almost always death. But despite mentally preparing myself, the finale left me in shock. In the finale, Rabi, Sonu, and Moon look towards the future, invested in their first event when tragedy strikes in the form of Kami with a bruised ego. Throwing false allegations of blasphemy on Sonu, the trio find themselves hounded by a mob. And once a mob zones in, is there any escaping it? Such situations will see many caught in the crossfire, and in this case, Ehsan, a man who has lived as a coward all his life, stands tall to defend his daughter and Sonu against that mob. His brother also steps in to save Rabi, defending the young woman he raised as a daughter from a mob set on her by his own son. In Nadan, we saw Kashif Hussein's character cower when forced to face a mob of his own creation. This time, Kami sees his father murdered before his own eyes, murdered by a mob of his own creation, helpless to stop it.
छोटी-छोटी बातों पे जीता जागता बंदा मार देते। श्रीलंका से चला था बेचारा, हमारे लोगों ने उसे जिंदा जला डाला। लंका वाले भी क्या सोचते होंगे? जिन लोगों को हम आंखें मुफ्त में देते हैं, उन्होंने हमें लाश भेज दी।
In the end, the trio is on their own. Was this a decision made by the trio themselves? A decision to separate so that at least one of them would have the hopes to escape the mob? Or was this a decision to show that these three lives had their own individual stories and in the end, we are all alone in death? We can't be certain, but what I am certain of is the fear that one goes through in such a situation no one ever wants to be on the receiving end of. And yet, Mustafa Afridi and Saifi Hassan drive another stake through our hearts, showing visuals of the real-life victims of such lynchings, such as Mashal Khan and Priyanta Kumara Diyawandana, as Sonu, Rabi, and Moon fall prey to their own on-screen mob. It's those final shots which leave the viewer almost shell-shocked, with Mustafa Afridi himself, once the animated MC, weeping on the streets, and Laddu crying in an abandoned tent with Hassan's lifeless body in his lap. It's the bleakness of reality which hits the hardest. Who were Sonu, Rabi, and Moon? Three individuals with their own emotional baggage, hopes, and dreams for a better future. While moving forward to accomplish those goals, suddenly, in an instant, those dreams are shattered. Isn't this reality? Isn't this how mobs play out in real life? Does a mob care about the ambitions of its victims or who is waiting for them at home? It's difficult to discuss or dissect performances because every performance deserves a shout-out. But the true heroes of Man Neel O Neel are writer Mustafa Afridi, director Saifi Hassan, and producer Sultana Siddiqui for making the incredibly brave choice of creating this story for Pakistani television. Thank you for such a thought-provoking piece of art. But where do we go from here? What do we take away from this story? How does it stop? How does mob violence stop?